and I am coming from the organization called Mercy Corps. I just wanted to welcome everyone to our webinar entitled Effective Stakeholder Engagement for Resilience, Experiences of Implementing Participatory Tools and Approaches in Complex Systems. So in this joint webinar, which is presented by the Climate Information Services Research Initiative and the Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance, presenters will share their experiences of participatory tools and approaches. As you may have noticed in the description of the webinar, with the increasing threats of climate variability, change, and hazards, we all are aware of the importance of including and involving the communities and institutions who are affected in risk reduction and resilience measures. But unfortunately, efforts to effectively engage with stakeholders are often undermined by constraints such as project design and resources, and sometimes lack of understanding of how to approach participation in a way that will support long-term impact. So in this webinar, we're bringing together the Climate Information Services Research Initiative and the Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance, who have both developed and piloted some innovative tools to address this gap. So as I mentioned, presenters will share their experiences examining what the projects have learned about effective stakeholder engagement and participation in complex systems, and how those contribute to resilience and sustainability. So we will begin with some overview of the tools from each of these organizations. And so Mary Allen from Practical Action and Amanda Lewis from Catholic Relief Services are joining us from CISRI, the Climate Information Services Research Initiative, and Emily Etienne from Practical Action joins us from the Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance. So I am now going to hand it over to Mary and Amanda for a presentation from CISRI on the tool and approaches.
Hello, everybody. My name is Mary Allen, and as Ali said, I will be presenting with Amanda Lewis, sharing findings from recent pilots in Senegal and Niger that tested a new participatory methodology to amplify end-user voices and perspectives in shaping climate information service systems. Next slide. So what do we mean by climate information services? Climate information services provide daily forecasts, seasonal forecasts, climate and weather bulletins, and in our case, we were interested in smallholder farmers. This information helps farmers to anticipate and plan for shocks during the cropping season, to take decisions that can build their resilience. For example, having information that the rains will start in earnest 1 month late, despite the fact that there's been one early rainstorm, means that farmers can delay planting until the optimal time and make decisions to use a short cycle variety. Compared to farmers who do not have this information, they can anticipate and plan for worst case scenarios, adapt their crops and practices, and so on. Next. But the systems that get climate information to farmers are complex, involving multiple actors and with many different ways that the information reaches or doesn't reach both male and female farmers. And even the information itself can be complex. It's hard to communicate the probability of forecasts and associated risks, and to have the right people with the skills and services in place to ensure that farmers can take decisions given various scenarios and then act on them. Next. In the face of such complexity, we developed a participatory approach that would allow actors from all across the system to learn from each other and to hear others' perspectives on how the information system is working, and to identify areas that they could each improve to make the whole system function better. Next. diagram shows the participatory climate information systems development approach as a 5-step process. It was tested in Niger with a DFID-funded BRACED project run by CRS, and in Senegal with several ongoing projects promoting climate information services in the Kaffrine region, which we will see in a moment in Amanda's part of the presentation. We don't have time to go into details about each of these stages, but there are 3 key aspects that I'd like you to note. Firstly, the whole approach is designed to empower smallholder farmers to engage with other higher level actors in identifying ways to improve the climate information service system. Once the preparatory stages, that's stages 1 and 2, are over, the empowerment stage, stage 3, is continuous. Secondly, the approach is based on an ongoing process of collaboration, learning and adaptation, shown here as stage 5. On the diagram, it ends with stage 3 and 4, but ideally this part of the approach would continue to accompany and track the process of system change over time. The third element is the core of the approach, stage 4, which is a series of workshops which bring together climate information service stakeholders from all levels to map the CIS system. Next. This diagram shows the basic components of the model we used to map the climate information service system. There are 3 elements to the systems map. In the center, we map the actors along the climate information service value chain and the links between them, from the information producers on one side to the end users on the other side. In the section below the actors, we map the services and functions that are essential for the dissemination and use of the climate information. In the section above, we map the various factors, economic, social, political, and so on, that enable or hinder the operation of the information service. After mapping the whole system, the participants in this process identify together the barriers and opportunities within the delivery mechanism for the climate information service, so the central section, such as, for example, a need to communicate messages to farmers in local languages and in simple terms. But they also go beyond the information delivery chain to identify barriers and opportunities within the broader system, in the enabling environment, and within the supporting services and functions. Now I'm going to hand over to Amanda, who will explain how we use this model in practice in Senegal to map climate information services. As you'll see in her photographs, we were not always very consistent about the choice of colours for the cards and post-it notes we used to do the mapping. In all cases, though, the 3 main sections of the map, as shown here, can be seen. Amanda?
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. Thank you so much, Mary, for this beginning of the presentation. So now what you see here is the map of Senegal. The Senegal pilot focused on the Kaffrine region, shown here, and Mary just described how we map the system. And in Senegal, we started by facilitating the CIS system mapping in 5 villages. Here, on the next slide, you can, again, here you can see a map that a group of women in one village created, reflecting their perception of the CIS system, with the key actors in the middle and the environment and the supporting services, as Mary described, on the top and the bottom. We then facilitated a systems mapping exercise with commune leaders, on the next slide, with male and female representatives from each village. And then next slide. At the regional level, again with the farmer representatives, as well as government leaders, NGO representatives, radio journalists who share the forecasts, and others in the room. Next. Again. After the regional workshop, the participatory mapping culminated in a workshop in Dakar, bringing farmers together with regional and national level stakeholders, including the National Meteorological Service, who creates the forecast each year. So without going into all the detail that you can see on this map, you can see from the photos I've just shown you that the system mapping becomes more complex as more actors get involved. And I think we'll see some of this complexity in the next presentation from Emily as well. These maps then create the basis for group discussions on the challenges and opportunities to improve the CIS system. The key aspect of this approach is that all the stakeholders come together. They're able to share and hear each other's perspectives on how the system is working. This includes actors from across the whole system, the producers of CIS like the Meteorological Service, the intermediaries in the information chain such as NGOs, supporting services like radio journalists, policymakers, and of course the male and female farmer end users themselves. Next. While the key is to involve all the stakeholders, the methodology is centered around the farmer end user. Rather than designing or improving a CIS system with the end user in mind, this approach brings stakeholders together to design or improve the CIS system directly with the end users. So this photo shows the empowerment stage mapping that Mary described with smallholder farmers before they engage with other stakeholders at the regional and national mapping workshops. This empowerment process gives smallholder farmers the resources, knowledge, and skills to participate actively in the mapping workshops with other stakeholders, allowing them to think through their perception of the Climate Information Service system before discussing with the larger group. Next. Here you can see a small group of CIS stakeholders at the national level workshop in Dakar. They're identifying solutions and opportunities for improvement related to their Climate Information Service system after having mapped out the actors, environment, and supporting services. This participatory approach brought together stakeholders that had not been at the same table before. Through engaging in dialogue and learning with others, each actor was able to see issues that they couldn't have seen if they had not heard from each other, and they identified changes that they could make both individually and collectively to improve the system. One small example from both the Niger and Senegal pilots was that the farmers expressed their need for forecasts to be delivered in their local language rather than in French. While the other stakeholders may have heard this before, hearing it directly from the farmers with examples and personal testimony brought this point home for the national stakeholders in a way that had not previously gotten through. The participatory dialogue that this approach provides space for can catalyze change in the system as stakeholders find solutions together to achieve the impact that they desire. This is why engaging actors from all areas of the system is key to this approach, and having direct engagement with end users keeps the focus on ensuring impact and on responding to the real needs of farmers. Next. In conclusion, just to wrap up, the website link shared here provides much more information on the methodology and the reports from the pilots in Niger and Senegal, as well as work from other partners on USAID's Learning Agenda for Climate Information Services. We're happy to answer questions, and you can contact us also at the email addresses that you see here. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you both so much. And now we're going to hand it over to Emily from Practical Action, who's going to speak on behalf of the Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance about their participatory tool and approach. And then we will transition into some questions from participants on the webinar and have more of a discussion.
Hello, everyone. This is Emily speaking from Practical Action. Just waiting for the slides to appear. So, okay, here we go. So, hello, everyone. Hope you can hear me well. So today I will present to you a little bit of the flood resilience measurement for communities, which is an approach that has been developed by the Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance, and which include system approach and stakeholder engagement to support decision making in improving community flood resilience. So let's go maybe for next slide now. Okay, so just a little bit of context, so where this came from. So the Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance is made of the institution that you saw in the first slide. There were these logos. We are a bunch of NGO, research institute, and a company, the Zurich Insurance, and all gathered with one goal, which is that floods have no impact on people's ability to thrive. We are now on the second phase of the project. We are working in more countries and in more partners, and here you have a map with the country where we are working right now. So during the first phase of the Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance, we developed an approach and a corresponding tool to try to understand better resilience. And currently we are in phase 2 of the project, polishing this tool and applying it in these countries. So next slide. Okay, so as I said, our goal is that floods have no impact on people's ability to thrive. So we are actually not trying to prevent floods, because that will be impossible, but we are trying to support communities so that when floods happen, they don't have impact that will hinder their development. So we are looking for building their resilience towards flood. And to do that, we want to design interventions. But how can we know what works? Because there are so many things we want to do. And so to do that, we need to understand what is the resilience of communities. And that means that we should look first at several levels. We focus mainly at the community level, because the community level is communities are the type of actors who are most directly impacted by floods. But actually, within one community, you could have also several different groups who will be affected differently by floods, such as farmers, women, children, etc. And even though it is the community itself which is impacted by floods, what happens to other levels also impact what is happening at the community level. So for example, actions at the watershed or basin level, or policy at the district level will also have an impact to the resilience of community. And even at the national level, and you haven't added the international level, but what is being done, like laws and regulation, funding mechanism, all of this will also have an impact at the community level. So we really need to look at a lot of different levels. Next slide. We also need yes, thank you. We also need to look at different aspects. So when we're talking about flood resilience, we are talking about a lot of things, which is like, will flood affect safe water? But first, maybe has the community have access to safe water on the first place? How is transportation, social inclusiveness linked with floods, and also how these different aspects are linked with each other. No? For example, if I have a very good local leadership and a good social inclusiveness, I could guess maybe more risk reduction investment to improve my energy supply, and so on. So everything is kind of linked. And actually, in this map, I have not put everything. So next, please. We have a lot of more things. So this leads us to this kind of headache. I have too many things to consider. How do I unpack the complexity, as Maria and Amanda said in the first presentation? So next slide. So one of our first challenge is we have a lot of things to measure when we want to look at resilience. And how can we do something more simple? So in the first phase, when we first designed a flood resilience measurement tool, we first identified 88 sources of resilience. But that was quite a lot. That was quite difficult to measure. Next slide. Yeah. So we have now 44 sources of resilience. And how did we get there? So actually, when we first started to implement our tool, we then got some data, some information, and that helped us to understand, of all the things we had measured, which things made more sense to understand resilience. So it doesn't mean that there were things that were totally irrelevant. That means that there were maybe they will explain less of resilience than others. So next slide. Okay, so that give us. Oh, sorry, getting because not slide, it's just a click. Yes. So that leads us to our first lesson. Not everything that can be counted counts or is critical to the analysis. Next slide now. Thank you. Then once we have defined what we want to measure, we get our results. But we still have a lot of things to analyze, even with only 44 sources, because the sources of resilience were linked as well to questions, and we had more than 100 questions. So it's still a lot to analyze, and that's why we designed a framework with different lenses to analyze the results. So here you have the lenses that we're using. We have actually another one that will explain. So that means when I get all my information, I could decide, okay, I would look at this information through the lens of the 5 capitals. So the 5 capitals are from the Sustainable Livelihood Framework, so which has financial, social, human, and physical capital. So I could analyze all my results through, for example, let's say I want to see if this community has a good natural capital. With the website, I could track the results through this lens. I could use also other lens, like the 4R, which are robustness, rapidity, redundancy, and resourcefulness. Not going into detail here. I had also themes. I had also the disaster risk management cycle and the system level view, which means looking at the community level and also at an upper level, because as Marie and Amanda said, we also need to look at the broader picture at the enabling environment. Another lens that does not appear there because it's not exactly a lens, but we can also look at the result, looking at sex, age, and disability. Next click. Yeah, so here the lesson learned is if you have a complex system to be analyzed and you cannot look at all the big picture at once, what you can do is look at it through several lenses to unpack the complexity. And here, sorry, some echo. Okay. Here, what is good is that we don't have only one lens. We have several lenses, because if we were using only one lens, then we might lose the complexity of the system. Okay, next slide. So now talking a little bit how we try to also look at stakeholder engagement with this tool. So first we wanted to engage stakeholder during data collection or information analysis. And ideally we would like to have everyone giving us all the information they have, which will be better in theory, because we will have then the most information that we can have. But is it really possible? So we have their time constraints. For example, if you do a household survey, you cannot ask 300 questions to one household. That would not be possible. You have also the suitability or feasibility of some data collection methods. So how can we engage stakeholder without asking them things that are not relevant or not possible? A click, please. Okay, so we fixed that by having a tool that allows mixed data collection methods. So we take one source of resilience and we say, okay, I think this information, the person, the type of people who might have this information are actually the household. So I will add this source to household. This one is better with focus group. This one is better with a key informant. Of this one, I actually have already the data through a second source of data. And I can also choose different data collection methods, which allows triangulation. For example, if I want to interview the mayor to know what is the action in his or her district, the mayor might give me very optimistic information, but I would want then to ask the same information to a focus group to be able to triangulate data. So that leads us also to a lesson learned. Please have a click, which is we do not need to ask everything to everyone. we can ask different kind of people, different type of information, as long as we are sure that that does not hinder the quality of data. Next slide, please. Okay, then how can we engage stakeholders during data interpretation? And here is how can we show information in a way that makes sense without misinterpreting data or getting lost in information density. Next click, please. And here what we did is a system quite simple, grading A, B, C, D with each sources. So we will look at each source and define if it was an excellent practice, which will be an A, or on the other end, where we would have significant trouble with a source, that would be a D. So that allows us to have a system that is easy to understand, to visualize, and to have an entry point to discuss with stakeholders. And this is also important that this grading is made by human being. So it's not a grading that will be calculated automatically based on the information that we gathered, but rather we will have a real team looking at all the information and then decided if there will be a A, a B, a C, a D. So that leads us to our fourth lesson learned, with a click, please, which is we have a complementarity between the machine, so the software we are using to gather all this information, and people knowledge to interpret the results. Next slide, please. Thank you. And the last step is how do we use data and information to take the good decisions. So we already seen that we have different lenses, we have different colors and grades, but how can we practically use them to support decision making? And what we want to avoid is to get back to a community and to say, okay, so you have weakness in this. We also want to not forget about strengths, and we don't want to look at the different aspects in isolation from each other. One click, please. Okay, so here what we propose is a workshop with the community to analyze the result together and then agree on priority and strengths. Next click, please. Okay, so here's an example of an activity to do with the community. So you have the sources of resilience, your 44 sources, and you will put them on a matrix with the grading that they had, but also if it's less urgent or quite urgent. Then you will try to look for trends. Next click, please. So here, for example, you can see that A, you have a lot of things that seems to go together: education, local leadership, and social inclusiveness. Next click. So it looks like you have a high social and human capital. On the contrary, you have quite weak safe water, and it seems quite urgent. Next click. So here, how can we use maybe our strengths, high social and human capital, to improve our safe water? We could, for example, because we also have a high good energy supply, use these two aspects of strength to improve the weak aspect. Next click, please. And what is important to have this as a workshop and to discuss data with stakeholders is that we don't only want to reach the better solution, but we want to build consensus with the other stakeholders and to empower them. Okay, next slide. So here is, as a conclusion, an overview of the FRMC tool. So we use data collection mainly with cell phones and tablets, using this mixed data collection method to have different questionnaires. Then we create 44 sources of resilience, which is step 3. And step 4, we analyze them using the lenses and colors. Next one, please. So here are just a few pictures from different countries where we apply the tool. And that will be it for my presentation. Next slide, just to say thank you for your call and my email address in case you want to contact me. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Emily. I really appreciate that. So as you've kind of seen so far, there are differences between the goals of these two kind of approaches and tools, the goals of the participatory climate information services systems development approach, which focuses on potential risks for smallholder farmers and the opportunity that climate information offers, but the need to bring in the participation of all levels within the system, and then the participatory mapping flood resilience measurement for communities, which focuses on the specific risk of floods and communities' resilience to floods. So obviously there are quite a few differences, but I think you also heard that there's quite a bit in common between both the CISRI and the Zurich flood resilience tools and approaches. The emphasis on a systems approach to resilience is one of those, and also the focus on stakeholder engagement processes in very complex systems are two things that kind of have stood out, I think, for us for these two approaches and tools. So I'm going to right now just pose a few questions to the presenters, but then I would also like to designate a lot of the remaining time to questions from those who are in the audience participating. So first I'll just pose some questions to the presenters, but if anyone from the audience has questions that they would like to ask, please feel free to type them up in the chat box, and we will get to them after a couple of these questions. So first, in terms of the system approach, can you all provide some context about the need to approach climate information services and flood resilience as a system? For example, what does the systems approach contribute to resilience? And please, presenters, just feel free to unmute yourself as you answer.
Okay. So I'll give an example related to floods, to show that we have to look at everything kind of together. So, for example, let's imagine a community, a rural community, where people do not have a good awareness of floods and the dynamic of floods, and they're not sure about, they don't know a lot about future floods. At the same time, they have some strong economic constraints. It's a poor community. They want to find a way to improve their situation. So, and one resource that they have is they have a very nice forest, and they think that maybe they could cut trees and use that as a resource to get higher incomes. But so if they do that, if they cut the trees, that will impact the nature of floods that they might have. It will increase soil erosion, maybe decrease water quality, and so on. So what I want to highlight with this example, if we look only at one aspect, if we, for example, we always only look at you should not cut trees because it's not good, then you forget of all the other, which is that the community also need to be resilient from a human point of view. So it has to be a good awareness of what are flood risk, but they also have to have a good financial capital. So in this case, they should be rich enough not to be obliged to cut the trees. So looking at with a system approach allow us to understand how these factors are connected, and to analyze not only a single aspect and thinking that if we solve one aspect, we will increase resilience, but it obliges us to look at different factors to understand better resilience and not do things that might have unwilling consequences that we might not have planned. So I would say that would be an example of why a system approach will contribute to resilience for floods.
Hello, this is Mary. So just for the climate information services, some of the reasons why we felt it was important to address this from using a systems approach. As we saw from the photographs, the actual climate information services that we looked at were very complex. There were a lot of actors. The information passed through lots of different actors to get down to the end user, the farmer. in many of the cases. And so there's plenty of opportunity for information to get distorted, delayed, and just paying a lot of attention to how good the climate information is doesn't necessarily mean it's actually going to reach the farmer in time. It doesn't necessarily mean that the farmer is going to be able to do anything with it. Particularly, for example, if the farmer has to change a practice, does he know about it? Has there been any training? Are the seeds available? Do radio producers need training? So we felt that there was a lot of complexity in the system, and if we continue just to focus on the accuracy of the climate information itself and hope that the rest of it works, then it wasn't necessarily happening. And to actually get change in the system would need lots of different actors to come together and agree that something else needed to change, possibly just slightly, or a budget needed to be made available for something to happen. And then another one of the things that came out a lot was in systems tend to be characterized by feedback loops. And what we found in both Niger and Senegal was, in fact, that there was a sort of systematic absence of any institutionalized way of feedback, either on the accuracy of the forecasts or on what people have been able to do with the information. So people were just putting information out, but less concerned about what was happening with it. So we felt that by using a systems approach, and particularly a participatory systems approach, we would be able to move for the system itself, for the system actors themselves to start to make changes in the system.
Great. Thank you so much to both of you. I think I'm going to turn it over to a question that we actually brainstormed ourselves, but I think one of our participants went even further with it, which I'm going to read now. So the question is, how can you sustain the stakeholder engagement for resilience when the process is led by external agencies? So I think that this is really important to ensure that the participation is ongoing throughout the entire process and continues, especially when external agencies are involved. So if the presenters could speak to how practically the approach ensures that continuous participation.
Yeah, this is Amanda from Catholic Relief Services. I can chime in on this one from our experience with the CISRI project and the participatory mapping. One of the steps involved is to identify champions within the system who are interested in this mapping process and willing to step up and carry that forward. I think that's one way that we were looking for how we can address this very question, especially in our case, since this was a short-term pilot, so it was shorter than even what we might do if we had a longer-term project that was delivering climate information services. So just for a quick example, in Niger, one of the ways that we did this was also to engage with a longer project, like the Braced Sur un Million project in the Tillabéri region. And so those project staff who were already engaged with the National Meteorological Service and radio stations who were providing this information were able to carry that forward beyond our pilot and then get the longer term stakeholders like community early warning groups and the Met Service themselves involved for the longer term sustainability. And in Senegal, similarly, we looked for actors that were going to be in the system longer than we would and really tried to engage them right from the beginning in mapping and validating the methodology and looking for how we could adapt it.
Okay, so I will maybe complement with another experience, a concrete experience from Peru. So in Peru, the whole project and also the tool is also a way to achieve that is get everyone at the same table, even after the project or the data collection is over. So what was really important in this experience in Peru is when we started working with the community and the local authority, it was highly conflictual. So we will have a lot of conflict. So it's like the community saying the authority is not doing anything for us, like they're useless, and the authority will say community don't understand anything. When we do stuff, they do not participate. It was very hard to get everyone on the same page. So the project and the tool was a way to achieve that as well, and will be in the future, is how we can get these people sit together, and I think that was highlighted very well in the C3 presentation, but not only one time. How can we create mechanisms so that these kind of actors sit together? And one way to achieve that in Peru was to include community representatives in working group in the municipality. So that means that when the municipality will design some plans of actions, the community will take an active part of that. So that allows the stakeholder engagement to be more sustained. You have to find ways to institutionalize participation mechanisms.
Great. Thank you all. So another question here from the audience is, in the Zurich tool, can you go over how the urgency of each resilience factor is determined? Is it just triangulated from stakeholder interviews, or is there a weighting included based on the potential impact of addressing resilience?
Okay, so here we don't have a magic tool to do that. Here, how we do that is together with the community and or other stakeholders, and review the results from the tool. And try to prioritize if it is urgent or not. So we don't have something magical to do that. We don't have a weight that the tool will say, okay, this is very urgent, because that can depend from every community. For example, if you have a transportation system that is not very good and that will be affected during a flood, but that your community is actually self-sustainable. So, I mean, like water or education or even health is not dependent on transportation. Maybe transportation is not very urgent. On the contrary, if you have a community that needs a specific road to access to hospital or to whatever, or to work, and this road is blocked during a flood, then transportation will be very urgent. So the tool does not give that level of urgency. This is something that needs to be defined in a workshop, and that's why stakeholder engagement is very important.
Great. And the question for the CISRI folks is that what can be carried from CISRI to an international meeting of community-based adaptation practitioners that could inspire further research or piloting or innovation using climate information services? Amanda or Mary, do you want to take that question?
Repeat the question, sorry. Didn't hear it.
Sure. No, the question is what can be carried from CISRI to an international meeting of community-based adaptation practitioners that could inspire further research or piloting or innovation using climate information services?
Okay, yeah, this is Amanda. I can start. You know, sometimes with these questions, I get the better ideas for responses long afterwards. So please do feel free, any of you, to reach out by email for more follow-up. But just, I guess, as a initial response, I think we looked at this tool, as I mentioned, sort of in a short-term context. So one of the things that could use more piloting is looking forward to how the changes in the system are carried forward as the process goes on. So after the initial mapping workshops and people identify these different barriers, and we saw in the work that we did up to date a lot of energy and momentum. But I think what we need to look into further is some of this stage 5 of how you carry that forward. And I think this comes along with the previous question about internal stakeholders carrying it forward and some of that motivation. So I think that's part of it. I don't know, Mary, if you have something else to add.
I wasn't too sure about the question. I think that's why I asked it again, because it wasn't, I didn't understand it so much as what we would do, but what could we take to a conference for community-based adaptation? Is that what you were saying? What lessons would we take from it? Sorry.
It looks like that is the question.
Right. Yeah. I think if that was the case, if it was sort of like what did I take from this? I think that it was the fact that I think, as Amanda said in her presentation, that there's a difference between designing something with somebody and designing something with somebody in mind. And because climate information is itself very complex and highly technical, I think there's a tendency to for it to be a very top-down. Climate information services tend to be very top-down, and I think that one of the things I would take away was that actually by enabling the farmers to progressively learn about the system and where the information was coming from, and it actually sort of gave them confidence to start to engage with high level actors. I mean, a bit of analysis we did on some of the proposals that came up, proposed actions that came out at the end. It was quite interesting to note that it was only from the village level meetings were people talking about the quality of and the timing of the climate information, the quality of the information. They wanted different information at a different time of the year, in addition to what they were getting already. Whereas the meetings that were at the at the regional level and the national level had sort of assumed that the information was itself okay. Yeah, and they were really focusing much more on the how do we transmit it. So I think that it can be a very powerful way of amplifying the voices of the end users and getting them really involved in the design of the system or the improvement of the system if one already exists.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, so next we're going to pose a question to Emily. Let's see, I'm just opening it up here. So how have you found the causal relation between different sources of resilience? For example, how would you find which source of resilience graded as A can improve the situation of sources graded as D?
Okay, so here as well, sorry, the tool does not give us directly an answer. We need to analyze this on a case-by-case basis, but one of our assumptions that we have that until now have proven to be true, if generally speaking, if you want to focus first on one thing, you might want to focus first on human and social capital. The assumption there is if your community is well, maybe not only formally educated, but has a high level of awareness, understanding, knowledge, and at the same time is well organized, that's where I would start from, because if your community is well organized and has enough knowledge, then they can leverage funding or external support to work on the sources that are weak. So, for example, if the community is very well organized, they can make their own plan of what they want to work on in their communities. They can write down some projects that they will then present to the local municipality to get improvement in their own community. You know, for example, they could ask if they're very well organized and they reach a consensus within the community, they would be able to more easily leverage funds to get safe water, get transportation. So there is not one rule, say this source of resilience will, if you have it right, it will improve the other. But generally speaking, I would say that if you have good human and social capital, that's a good way to start to try to improve the other sources of resilience.
Great, thank you, Emily. So I was asked one question about whether the presentations will be shared. So yes, we will share the presentations as well as email addresses for the presenters to all of the participants after. Another question for the SISRI team, but I think could also be applied to both approaches. How did the realities of power dynamics between different actors affect your workshop? And how was that managed or prepared for? Amanda and Mary, did you catch that question?
Yeah, thank you. I'll go ahead and then Mary can add if she has other things. I think that this is the whole sort of point of the empowerment stage, is to prepare actors that we would typically think of as less powerful, smallholder farmers who might not speak French and not be educated at the same level as your PhD researchers at the Met Service, to come into that space with them and be able to share their perceptions and their perspectives on the system and have that be listened to and valorized. So I think the main way that we prepared for that is having this stage 3 empowerment phase and working with the communities so that they really understood what they saw as the strengths and weaknesses of the system coming into that workshop, and were able to both understand the system more broadly and their piece of it. I think this question also relates to another one that was asked, and this is the question, it seems the CIS mapping tool considers farmers only as end users. However, in reality, farmers can also be generators of information on weather and livelihoods based on indigenous systems. And how do we ensure that in our mapping we evaluate the role of farmers as users and generators? So I see this kind of related to this power dynamic question, because in reality, when we brought them into the same room, and I'm sure this would differ from culture to culture and situation to situation, but what we could say higher level actors were very eager to hear the farmers' perceptions and to hear how it was working for them. In some cases, this was really the first time they'd had that opportunity to hear from farmers in this kind of context. And so that really came out in our pilots as a strength. But then also to see how farmers, they're not just the vulnerable farmer who's illiterate and can't, has to be considered to be empowered, but they're also really seeing what they're bringing to that system, and including in that map the indigenous information and the information that starts from local leaders and shared by local leaders. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is in that system, all of these different things came out, and that I guess that's one of the benefits of having all those actors at the table, but also preparing the farmers ahead of time. I hope that answers the question. If you have something to add, Mary, go ahead.
mean, I think all that I would add was just to say that, particularly at the national level workshop, that was something that we were quite aware of, particularly in Niger, the first one. I don't think we were able to address it well enough, whereas in Senegal we were able to have longer to discuss the options. And I think if we'd even had even longer and made it, been able to have farmers in a group discussing the various options for action, you know, at local level, or what they thought were the priority actions, I think it would have helped to, you know, rebalance address that power balance even better. I think we did to some extent, but I think if any of us were doing it again, we would take maybe longer, or maybe add some way of getting people to work in groups at the end, so that their voices could be clearly heard in the final discussions. Yeah.
Thank you both. And thank you all participants for your questions. I know we only have a couple minutes left, but we weren't able to get to everyone's questions because there were so many and so many good ones. But we will be following up with an email that includes the PowerPoint presentations, as well as the emails of presenters, and information about where you can find resources for these approaches and tools. So please feel free to send along any additional questions that you might have to any of us here on the webinar. And again, we'll send around those resources, and the final methodology for the SISRI tool, it will be coming out shortly. So we will also follow up with more information about that when it's released. But I just wanted to thank all of the participants that joined us today. This has been a really nice discussion, I think, about participatory systems, participatory approaches, and also working in very complex systems. And also wanted to thank the presenters as well. So we will be following up with everyone, but thank you again, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.